Listen up. We are back with another episode of the Construction Mentor Podcast. My name is Ike. I am your host. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at the Construction Mentor. And as always, you can catch this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. What are we here to do? We're here to promote the construction industry as an opportunity to live an affluent lifestyle. There is no better industry to put in hard work and get a guaranteed return out of that hard work. Why else are we here? We're also here to make sure that people have the tools that they need and the tools that they need to grow and take their career or their company to whatever level they want that to. The sky is truly the limit. Part of that, one of the biggest or most important aspects of construction that I see, that I always try to push, no matter if I'm mentoring somebody that is a new person or even somebody that's been in the industry for 30 years, procurement. The whole industry revolves around procurement. So we're going to talk about what that means, why it's so important. And even though it is the most important part of a project, no matter what project you're doing, no matter what the scope is or where you are in the world, why it's so important, yet it seems to be the part that's overlooked the most and the part that people, for lack of a better word, screw up. And to talk about that, we have Eric. Eric, how do you say your last name? Is it Helitzer?
Yeah, perfect. Helitzer. Most people don't get that right the first time. But yes.
Look at that, huh? Eric Helitzer.
It's perfect.
From SubBase. You can go check them out at SubBase.io. So Eric's going to talk about where he was in the industry, why he can take the product and the platform that he's taken to the contractors, what gives him the credibility to know how to serve any kind of subcontractor out in the no matter where they are, as well as what his platform can offer and help you not drop the ball and help you streamline processes and make sure you're hitting all your schedules. So with that, Eric, how are you?
Great. Hey, man. Really appreciate Ike, you having me on. Would love to kind of get into it and give a little bit of sense of my background, because I think it's important whenever we talk about construction technology of why we created SubBase and what was the gap we were filling for. So my background is always been construction. I am not a technical software founder. I'm a third-generation builder, graduated from the University of Florida Ricker School of Construction, and started my career very early on working the trades. I worked for one of the largest, still today is the largest concrete shell contractor, really learning and understanding the process of pre-construction, dabbling my feet into operations. And then in 2014, when things started to digitize a little bit faster, I was brought into the family business, which was a construction management GC at the time in South Florida, mid-sized firm. And they started to see the inefficiencies, but more so, they started to see the efficiencies of using software to help grow the business without growing headcount crazy.
So Eric, can I just jump in right there real quick? So you're a Florida Gator, like chomp that Florida, for those
yes.
people. Yes, like okay,
big time. I'll actually say that I'm a double Gator. I got my master's there as well. We stayed an extra year. But yes, big time Gator here.
Okay, double Gator. And you graduated when?
I graduated in 2010 with my bachelor's and then 2011 with my master's.
2010 with your bachelor's. So you saw some pretty good football teams when you were there early. You had a little overlap with Mr. Tebow, right?
We had an overlap with Mr. Tebow and Mr. Percy Harvin. We also had an overlap with the basketball Joakim Noah, Al Horford.
Yep.
So we saw 4 championships in a span of 4 years.
Yep. And he did not run into Aaron Hernandez, which is why he's still here. No, I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Too many people making it. They absolutely beat that to death on the Tom Brady roast. So my point, where I wanted to go with that was, so you went to school at UF, yet you still came out into the trades. Why?
Yeah. So first of all, at the time I graduated, the market in South Florida was not very good, meaning there was a downturn in the market. And so I decided to stay an extra year, not just to learn more, but to really give myself some time before entering. And the one piece of advice that my family gave me, and coming from a third-generation builder, was they wanted me to get in to learn how to build. And they wanted me to go build somewhere else, which was at the trade level, the subcontractor level. And the reason I picked concrete was because I did a lot of research on the companies that we were looking at, but more so in concrete construction, it's your biggest critical path driver on a job. It is by far one of the most fun trades to work in. If you've ever seen people build formwork, place concrete, it's really, really awesome just to see and be a part of that. And at the end of the day, I knew that this would help me grow in my career to actually learn the sticks and bricks of how to build, so that I can then go into the GC world and eventually into like a development world, which I dabbled in for very little. And it gave me the building blocks to really be able to understand not just how to read drawings, but how to take all of the crazy components of labor material into one. And so that's how I got sucked into it first at the subcontractor level.
And let me ask, are you East Coast or West Coast?
East Coast, but our
East
team
Coast.
is also on the West Coast as well.
Gotcha. Okay. I live in Southwest Florida, so I'm pretty familiar with the market down here. I actually didn't know that you were in Florida. This half of Florida when you said that. So that's great. So were you in the field, or were you working in the office for them as like an assistant project manager or project manager of some kind?
So I actually started in the office as a junior estimator. I was doing planned takeoffs, and helping one of the senior guys who's now one of their VPs estimate new buildings. And the reason why I started there was because reading and understanding plans was one of the things that I wanted to do better at, because I saw a lot of people in the field that think and say they can build, they don't actually understand drawings. And when you're looking at concrete drawings in specific, shop drawings, it's hard. It's hard to learn. You don't get that in school. I didn't learn everything I learned in Rinker, which was the construction management school at UF. I actually learned from practical application. And so I started in pre-construction. I was then estimating some jobs. Baker then allowed me to go into the field to view on an operations level as a project engineer, more of an assistant role when they were doing some really large jobs, and kind of was dabbling between both, but really spent a lot more time in pre-construction, estimating, really understanding what it's going to take to build and schedule, and then seeing it come to life was like really the exciting part on the operations front. So that's where I started the career, was in that role.
Got it. Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start. A lot of people, they want to get up into the C-suite as fast as possible and work for, a general contractor and never actually experience anything in the field or take the time to learn, especially at the sub level, right? Like I always say that, if you look at a project, GCs know this much of the project, but they only know this much about every single trade. Whereas, when you're doing concrete, then, this much of the project and how it coordinates with other parts, but this much about it, right? You have an incredible depth of knowledge. And like you said, critical path, we're going to talk about the dominoes that you need to set up a job, but you can't build any trade without the concrete for it to sit on.
Yeah.
Right. Like you need a structure for it to sit on to install it. Right?
And we saw very, very early on that, the structure is driving the critical path. You want to cut time on a schedule, you're doing it through the critical path, which is most likely the structure for most part. And we saw, what it takes to build some of these high rises, and even the random big structures that were being built. But also, like in the world, concrete is the largest building material in the world. It's being used everywhere. And so that really was infatuating to see how awesome it is to work with concrete and how it really takes a team to get it built. But that was the exciting part of my career, which was early on in that space. So I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you know this, but China poured more concrete in 2012. I think maybe from 12 to 14 than the U.S. did from 1900 to 2000.
No, I did not. That's wild.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
That is wild. Yeah. And but before I want to take the leap into how you got to starting, this endeavor that you're in now. But one thing that's really interesting for young people out there that might not know how to create a schedule, whether they're in interiors right now and they're going into, some bigger ground up, core and shell construction, or maybe they're just young in the industry and they don't know any better. I had to learn about creating a schedule for concrete installs the hard way in Florida. Not necessarily getting it, but installing it. And I think in every region you come up with, you have different obstacles, right? What's the major obstacle in Florida with being able to cut a schedule around pouring concrete and building a structure?
Yeah. So I think the hardest part in South Florida is two things. One, it's obviously it's good and it's bad. It's the weather conditions in the summer, right?
Exactly.
You expect a lot of rain.
Yeah.
There's days where, you just can't pour because of the rain. There's also the risk of hurricanes. And anytime there's ever any type of tropical storm warning to hurricane warning, you're looking at days of preparation just to prep for a storm that may or may not hit. But the good thing and the benefit of South Florida is that we build 12 months out of the year. You go to Colorado, you go to all these other areas, it's hard to pour concrete in the freezing cold. It's expensive, it can be done, but it's very hard. And the other thing that we face is the building regulations and the building codes. You know, when we're building high rises, commercial high rises here, you could be pouring shear walls with 10,000 PSI concrete up to 12,000 PSI concrete with huge pieces of steel and number 12 rebars that most people don't even understand the size and the magnitude because of the wind loads and the really strict building codes down here. So building in South Florida, I've always said, is an anomaly. When you build in South Florida, you can essentially build anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so people don't realize that a couple of things with what you just said. Florida, a lot of people think, you know, Massachusetts, California, New York, when it comes to tough building codes. Actually, Florida, and I've taken the GC tests in some other states, Florida actually has some of the toughest tests and toughest codes. I think a lot of people think that it's like hillbilly land or swamp creature land with, you know, with people living in trailers and stuff like that and hunting alligators. Because of the weather conditions, it's actually a lot harder to build here. There's a few things that you talked about as well when you talked about, you know, the strength of concrete. You talked about 10,000 versus 12,000 PSI, right? So when, for all you young people out there that, you know, may not know a lot about structures, there's different strengths to the composition of concrete, right? And then you talked about number 12 rebar, which, you know, you got to pay attention to the thickness of your rebar and the spacing of your rebar, and all those details matter. And the way that you vet that installation or that detail prior to going out there and actually putting the rubber to the road, the structural engineer actually doesn't design that. The subcontractor actually does. They say, hey, I'm going to create what is called a shop drawing, right, which is part of your submittal process. And then you say they approve it, and then you turn around and they order all the rebar and the concrete per that design, right? Now, with the weather, I found out the hard way, not only about structures, because like we don't have tie beams up in Boston, you know, where I came from up north. It's just different structures down here, right? Like, when you go to build trenches, like it's not even just about being able to pour the concrete. If you're trenching out for a foundation or something like that, high probability that the rain is actually going to wash that out, and you're going to have to retrench it the next day. And
there's also, and it's a great point when it comes to foundations, because we experienced that every building we built, even in my GC days when I was down here, was, you know, 4 feet from 0, you're hitting water and sand.
Yeah.
So the ability to build these big structures that go 40, 50 feet in the ground, potentially deeper with auger cast piles that are going hundreds of feet, you know, there's a lot that goes into the foundations here, to not just the dewatering aspect, but, you know, all the different types of foundations that can go is really awesome to see. And one thing that we saw in construction, specifically concrete in South Florida, was in the summer, because of how hot it is and how humid it is, the evaporation of the water inside of that concrete can evaporate very quickly. So if you've got a big pour, or that's why most pours are done very early morning, as far as slab pours, you know, you can have guys that are putting a lot of water into the cement mix, messing up the water cement ratio, which could affect the way that the concrete's placed, which could affect the way that it's finished and cured. So there's so many things that go into it, which is what I love. I love to see and understand the science behind, like, how does it work? And so that's kind of how I still am very, like, obsessed with the concrete world, not just because of the network we built, but also just how awesome it is to see these structures go up.
And it's funny because in some ways it can evaporate, but then in other ways, like when you're trying to get a finished flooring product, depending on it, you need that flooring product to be able to breathe. Otherwise, you'll trap moisture coming out of the concrete, right? And if it's too humid, it won't come out quick enough, right? And then it's like, well, how do we dry out this concrete? Which is a whole nother conversation. But that's so the long and short of it is that, you know, even if you're on interiors, like understanding all of these things around these trades and where your pain points are, whether you're working in a trade or you touch another trade or you're a GC coordinating all these trades. These are important things to learn. And oftentimes people learn the hard way, right? So you want to network, you want to get mentorship, you want to listen to shows like this, so you're on the lookout for it. You know, structures here are way different too. Like you said, with the hitting water 4 feet down. I mean, when you hear 4 feet down in the north, you're thinking that's my freeze plane, right? So I have to go deeper than 4 feet because I have to, you know, if the ground freezes, I have to be below it, right? Whereas down here, you're going to hit swamp water. And I learned about rigid inclusion. I don't know if you've ever done that, but, you know, rigid inclusion. So it's pretty crazy, right? So rigid inclusion, effectively what it is you're drilling into the ground 80, 100 feet with, you know, circles, cylinders that are maybe the size of like a solo cup. hundreds of them, and you're basically just pumping concrete into the ground to stiffen up the ground around it for the foundation to sit on to make it
no
solid.
steel either.
Yeah, right. And it's you're basically
fast.
injecting the ground with concrete. Right.
Yeah, exactly. We've done actually rigid inclusion on a job very specifically. I remember because we had hundreds of them, and I was used to seeing auger cast piles go in the ground, which takes a lot more time, especially with the rebar cages. So when they did rigid inclusion, it was amazing how fast it went and how seamless it was. And it was the first time I ever heard of it when we were doing that. So I definitely have seen it before. It's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And at the end of the day, you got to be aware of the things that go into this. You got to be aware of, what it means to test your soils and what you would even have to do to get to the conclusion that you need, something like that. So, and a lot of that has to do with the submittal process. So let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Submittal and procurement. What does that mean? So for those of you who don't know a submittal on a job, if you're doing it, the right way and you're going through the proper channels with the design team and all, submittals would be, hey, every drywall screw, every sheet of drywall, every paint color, every piece of mechanical equipment, every shop drawing that you have in a project, you have to send it in to the design team, the architect, the engineer to say, hey, this is what I'm going to install. And they say, yep, this looks good. Or no, make this change. And you have to get that approved before you do it. And procurement, the word procurement, sometimes people use that to talk about hiring subcontractors, right? You might hear the word purchasing agent kind of interchangeable there. But the way that I use it means procurement is getting the materials that you need, physically getting them to run the job. Eric, you align with that?
Yeah, totally. So, the interesting thing about submittals is it's really at a point where you're taking those drawings, which are what we call blueprints, however you want to call them, drawings. And sometimes there is not a spec. And sometimes the GC is trusting the subcontractor that you're going to understand, and the submittal that you're going to provide is going to be a comparison, if not a compatible solution with what we need to build for. There's sometimes games played here where I price something because the specs weren't clear and I'm going to use this submittal, but then the architect comes back and says, it actually needs to be this. And you can get into some trouble there just as a GC being the middleman. But yeah, submittal is really the Bible of what's going to go in from the material process. And a lot of the times what's interesting is there's really not a clear spec sometimes as to what needs to be in as far as material. And that's where the GC really relies on the subcontractor to make that decision so that the job can move forward in a much more efficient way.
Now,
so
here's a key before you go further. Here's something key, right? Your subcontractor will tell you, the GC, hey, I priced this job, it's $1 million, right? They made an assumption for what they're going to provide, right? Whether it's on the drawing, not on the drawing. The best thing that you can do is to be clear about that when you write your contract or you write your proposal to your client to say they're going to provide this strength concrete. They intend to provide this rebar. They intend to provide 100%. These doors, that HVAC equipment. You know what I mean? Because then when the architect comes back and they say, no, you're not that one. I want you to do the one that's twice as expensive. And then your subcontractor says, well, I didn't price that. And it's like, well, then you're in the he said, she said situation, right? Which is risk, and you don't want to be there. So you want to clarify this before you go in.
Happens on every job. Literally every job I have been involved with. There's been something. And one of the biggest ones, and this is just going back to the concrete stuff that we like to talk about a lot, is a lot of times what happens is when these mixed designs get approved, sometimes you're approving higher strength mixed designs in certain areas because of the cycle times you want in your formwork. And what we learned very early on was there is a cost to a higher mixed design strength that avoids certain aspects. You may not want to puddle as columns are coming in. So there's really a strategic way to think about submittals. But really the key, like you said before, is the documentation up front, because every job we've been involved with, every one of them, there is always a problem with what the subcontractor envisioned he was buying versus what the architect potentially drew up, or the owner on a plan, that there may be some clarity needed and involved. So you pretty much nailed that. Yeah.
So now you obviously saw this whole process, this procurement process, submittal and procurement process, as a pain point for the industry, as a need that must be filled. And SubBase.io was your solution to that. So how'd you come up with the idea, and what is the idea? And at what point were you like, you know what, this is my jump. This is my purpose. I'm going to chase this.
Yeah. So I'll go back to like when I left the subcontractor world, because this is how it started. I went to the GC world because there was a company called Procore that at the time had a couple of modules that the company I was at wanted to test out to see, can we efficiently build multiple jobs without hiring so many layers of people because of the amount of transfer of data, and one of them being submittals, right? Submittals were so heavy, you used to have to print out 5 different submittals, deliver to the architect. The architect would literally put a stamp on it, like a literal stamp, then you'd pick it up and then distribute to everyone. We were doing that, and in 2014, they hired me and said, listen, you're going to run our technology platform called Procore. There was 3 modules at the time. It was a blue interface that most people maybe remember. And that's where the light bulb went off, and we saw that that didn't have as much experience running jobs because I was still young and almost fresh out of school, were able to manage multiple projects and be able to interact with the architect and communicate along one central plane of truth, which was, really where the eye-opening, wow, this worked. And people in the industry saw that we were one of the earliest adopters in the area. And they saw that, wow, this company can actually streamline a very archaic process. And so after a couple of jobs, people started coming into our office with ideas, and they were connecting me to people because I grew in the company and the operations and executive role. And I had the technology umbrella under my hood because the CEO at the time was a very tech-savvy person, but wanted to keep growing the company from a technical perspective. And so I had a family friend that came in 2021 and said, hey, I want to build from the industry. He came from the Silicon Valley world of manufacturing startups, big startups, and couldn't believe that there was this much disparate movement in the way that materials were ordered. Email, text, phone calls, and you're talking $100 million companies that were managing millions of dollars with archaic systems, spreadsheets, and there was no visibility. Even to go look for recent pricing didn't really exist. You had to comb through, emails and archives. And so we partnered together. He started building prototypes as I was building in South Florida on the operations front, actual buildings. And he started pinging me with feedback. We partnered together. And long story short, in the end of 2021, I was having people come to my office to see demos of what we were building because we were using it on the job. I'd given it to my subs to just use and test. Hey, go send these orders out. And they were sending orders and they wanted more. Hey, it would be great if we can do this. It would be great if you could actually connect this to, for example, Procore.
Eric, when you say send orders out, are you saying that they were using that to actually send requests to vendors?
Yep. So they were using it to get requests from, so they were using it to get the requests from the field in a much more seamless way. And then with one click of a button, move it to one of their vendors because they had to document the transaction to begin with. And instead of them doing it manually, typing emails and looking through, file trees, they were doing it with one touch, and then everything was tracked for them. And that was the real basic.
Did that require any buy-in or use of the platform from the vendor side, or was this just a way for them a conduit to get out to them?
So it did require buy-in from the vendor side because we knew that building the system needed to have two-phase interaction because every material purchase is going to touch a vendor. And so we were able to seamlessly bring vendors on, but give them an interface and a tool that actually made sense up front. And so that is the frictionless nature of SubBase is we know that you're going to be buying from your vendors because it's a relationship heavy game here. We're not telling you like an Amazon experience to go, search and buy whatever you want. You know what you want, you know who you're buying from, and let's get your vendor on very easily so that they can have a great experience too. And that's what we built.
Nice. So did that integrate with Procore or replace that in any way?
No, it enhanced. So we did integrate with Procore eventually, and we're fully integrated with them. It enhances that. So all of our integrations, what they do is they don't replace, they enhance. They allow you to turn in your Procore, right, your financials tool into a real purchasing procurement tool because the data that sucks into Procore, you can eliminate all the data entry. Your QuickBooks Online, your QuickBooks Desktop, that's not an accounting software for contractors. It's not a material procurement contract, it's a solution. So we tie in without you having to change your workflow.
So what my big thing with Procore, I've used it for years. I've used CMIC and, I'm sure you're aware of the other, options that are out there. I think Vista is one and PlanGrid was doing it for a while. All these companies they've managed the process of submittals between contractors, subs, GCs, and the design team, and maybe even the client. They've managed that workflow to get approval. Where they dropped the ball or they had a gap was the material actually ordered and when is it coming? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if I got approval for a toilet, right, and 6 months, but I don't need it for 6 months, who's checking in to make sure that it was actually ordered against the schedule, or like when is it actually coming? And inevitably what happens on most projects is I need it tomorrow, and then you call and it's like, well, we never ordered it and it takes 4 weeks to get.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And that duration to get it is called a lead time, right? It's from the time from you order it to the time that it shows up on site is a lead time, for those of you who don't know. So have you addressed that?
Yeah.
Are we tracking deliveries? Finally.
We're tracking everything. We're tracking, not only are we tracking deliveries, but we're tracking, if you got a committed order, which is where that plumbing fixture would probably come from. Hey, I've got $1 million worth of plumbing fixtures that I'm committing to this vendor or these vendors. I don't need it today, but when I do need it, I want to be able to know what the lead time is, because it may be weeks, maybe months, and I want to know where it is in transit. Has it been shipped? Has it been delivered? Great. If it's been delivered, the guy in the field now can easily access through a phone to attach that ticket to a PO, because what happens next is as soon as that's delivered, you're getting an invoice. And what happens is the invoice typically goes to accounting, and then accounting has to look through paper stacks to say, oh, is this delivered? Where does this get cost coded to? Is this actually the right price? We automate all of that in one spot so that everyone has visibility from the field to the office and then even back to their vendors.
So are you tracking actual required on-site dates? I say required on-site as in, like, if I'm saying that the sinks are supposed to be on August 1st, this is the date that it's required on site. This is my lead time. Therefore, it's ordered by this date. Are we tracking those three things?
So right now we track when things are required at. So if I need it required at, August 1st, right? We are building the way on more of a pre-construction side to be able to give you the lead time gap so that you know when to order by. Our system does automate a lot of that. But the biggest thing that we've seen is like getting the data in for people is the first challenge, right?
Yeah.
There's tens of thousands of materials, and the database that you have to build and maintain is very difficult if you're doing it manually. So all of that historical data also lives with that. So you'll be able to see when things got delivered, how long did it take from the time you ordered it to the time you delivered it. All of that we track inside of SubBase.
And are you collecting that data for anything?
Yeah, so we collect it for our users to be able to make better purchasing decisions. So all the historical data is at their fingertips. So they can see what they last paid, when they last paid it, and they're making those decisions now in real time versus having us comb through and print out PDFs of old quotes or old orders.
Are you doing anything with the lead time information? Like what takes 10 weeks versus 20 weeks versus anything like that?
We're starting to get questions about that from our users to actually be able to aggregate the data on common items that have taken longer. Today in the platform, we're not doing anything with it yet, but we do envision that the future SubBase is going to give people better outcomes on how long things did take, not just to order, but to ship directly to a job site.
That would be incredibly powerful. And nobody's doing that right now. just so everybody knows, right?
And the reason why is because in order to actually have accurate information on that, you got to have a lot of data.
Right. And it sounds like you guys you probably have the data points. It's just a matter of tying those together and doing something with it. So that'll be incredibly impactful to see. Now, what's your typical company? Like what's your demo? Is it commercial, residential, smaller contractors who are typically using this?
Commercial contractors are our main bread and butter right now. And commercial meaning any of the top 8 trades: mechanical, electrical, plumbing, drywall, concrete, masonry, landscaping, even self-performing GCs, because self-performing GCs are very abundant now and they're buying a lot of materials. And typically, top line revenue of 10 million and above. And the reason why, at $10 million, you're starting to see the pain of trying to manage roughly $3.5 million of materials. And that's where you start to see that if you want to make it to the next level, which is really, I want to grow my business from 10 to 20 million, instead of adding bodies, right? That's where software becomes your tool. So instead of adding, $120,000 to $200,000 of labor, right, to manage the aspect of materials, because there's a lot that goes on when you climb from that route, you can utilize software like a SubBase to not just digitize it, but you don't need as many hands to touch the movement of data. And so that's where the threshold is. Our really sweet spot that we have been doing very well at is, 25 million to over $1 billion. And if you are a contractor that's doing that much volume as far as revenue, you're ordering almost every hour materials.
It's a $975 million sweet spot window.
Yeah, but listen, there's not many contractors out there that are doing $1 billion, but we are working with those that are there. And honestly, you'd actually be interested to know that some of these companies don't have those tools. You would think that the company's doing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue a year at the sub level, which is a huge sub. 35% of that is going to just be they're buying materials. And if they're buying $30 million of materials a year, you would be surprised how many of them don't have a tool that helps them move into their accounting system faster, that gives them visibility to buy better and to really manage this process. It's pretty shocking, actually.
So I can tell you just from, the GC world, and, my clients are Fortune 500 companies, all over the country. You would be very shocked. Not only is our industry a little archaic, right? We're very poor with data. We're very poor with having siloed infrastructure, right? What does that mean? It means that it takes 5 to 7 software platforms to run a project from end to end, whether it's from propose to build to document to invoice, right? Which is what you just mentioned. And our clients, they're all on spreadsheets too, right? So 95% of our data goes unused. We're not capturing it. It lives in what I would call dead format or dead files, which is everything from a PDF to an email to an Excel spreadsheet to a spiral notebook in somebody's F-150. And that means that you can't do anything with that data, right? That means that there's risk in transferring that between platforms or from your notebook onto an email, onto a PDF. It means that there's risk in tracking it. And it means that there's risk in somebody ordering the wrong thing or not going through the submittal process the right way, right? And then they install something that isn't allowed on the project or not spec'd or not up to snuff. Yeah. And guess what? Then you have to pay not only for what you just installed, but you got to pay to fix it, and you got to pay to fix anything else that you affected when you installed it, right? So that's an incredible amount of efficiency that you can pick up across all these platforms, while also mitigating your risk that can pile up pretty quickly, right? So what's the investment? What's the investment look like to use a SubBase.io? Is it based on volume? Is it based on headcount? What is it?
Volume based. So it's really about like how big are you as a company, and when you say how big, it's really like revenue wise, because we know that for a subcontractor, 30 to 35% of that revenue is going to be pure material, and depending on how many material, like how big you are there, we can pretty much guesstimate how many orders you'll be running through the system, and that's how we price. It's just based on volume. How big are you? We grow and we tier up with our companies. We can work with, again, a $10 million company, and we can work with a $1 billion company. That is the flexibility of how the platform works. So it really just depends on that. We don't go on a per user basis or per seat, and I'll tell you why. With material procurement, a single order touches the hands of 6 people between your internal teams and the external vendors, right? We don't want any friction. We don't want people to say, oh, well, I can't bring on Johnny in the field because I don't want to pay for his seat, because subcontractors look at software as an expense where we show them the ROI. So SubBase, for most subcontractors, they need to see the ROI. They need to understand how much it costs them every day, not just to send that PO out, to find the communication, but when that invoice comes in to get it back in your accounting system to reconcile into a budget, it costs a lot of dollars right now for them. So we are one source as far as like how we price, but tiered based on volume.
And what is the ROI? And I know that's the answer is probably it depends, just like everything else in the world. Right? But is there a typical ratio, proportion, percentage? What's like the main selling point that you go to? Bread and butter?
So the main selling point is we know the cost of what it is today manually, which is what most companies are doing to manage this entire process, and we can break down literally the numbers by module of how much it costs you today and how much we're going to save you. A traditional 25 company that's doing $25 million a year, SubBase alone, if they're fully integrated with us in their accounting system, which is where we sell to those that are on our integrations, because we know that provides the 10x that they need. We're saving anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000 a year on pure labor and material savings. Labor being, the guys in the field that are requesting to inside the office, the orders going to a vendor, the invoice reconciliations, delivery ticket matching. That all has a cost to it. And if the average billable rate, which is roughly about $35 an hour, if you have to touch an invoice between 5 people, even if it's 10-minute sheets, that's almost $35 in just labor to get a piece of paper from the field back into an accounting system. And so that is how every day, every hour,
multiple times a day. Yeah. From everybody.
If you're doing 25 million a year, you're sending about 10 orders a day. And if you cannot streamline that process, not only are you going to be struggling to grow, but your efficiency gain as far as your bottom line, you'll never be able to improve. And that's where we show the ROI.
And let's hammer that home. I mean, I could use another $300,000-$400,000 personally. I mean, that'd be nice.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an investment back in the company. That could be a boat. That could be a vacation home for, medium, I guess I was going to say small business owner, but medium-sized business owner. Yeah. That's all relative. Right. But that's a significant savings, right? I think, especially, on $25 million, if you're talking $300,000-$400,000, that moves the needle, right? That's 5%, something like that, 10%.
And that's how you have to get. And that's how you have to get. If you want to sell software to the subcontractor world, you can't sell software that only marginally improves the bottom line. It's got to be something that's so good that people are wondering, how did I operate my business without something like SubBase? Is what we show as far as how the system works.
And that was terrible math by me. It's a couple points. It's 1 or 2%, but that moves the needle, especially in an industry where your profit margin, if you're a GC, a lot of jobs that you do are going to be 2 to 3%, right? So, you're talking about on the overall job, a point or two bump, but on your profit margin, that ratio, grows much larger, which is where I was going with 5 to 10%, right? So that seems 100%. Like a logical investment for me. And like I said, I mean, this is the big pain point of the industry. This is what everybody screws up on every single project. I went from a project super and an assistant super to PM to senior PM to executive and now a director. And I still spend the lion's share of my time making sure that my teams, right down to the project level, are the assistant super level, or the assistant PM level, have a solid eye on procurement. That is the number one thing that I care about, above cash flow, above invoicing, above, schedule projections, because your schedule projection doesn't mean shit if you have no pulse on your procurement. Exactly. And it's crazy because I just had a conversation with somebody last week. The guy's 62 years old. I don't want to say what company he works for. He's in the state of Pennsylvania. And I asked to see his submittal log. This is like a $100 million company, right? This is a big GC. And he had no idea what I was talking about. Yeah. This is a senior project manager in his 60s. So what does that mean? That means that look at the bar of where the industry is and how successful companies operate, how archaic it is, how they're not doing this, and what a difference maker it can be to make an investment like this, not only in your company, but at the project level itself. Yeah.
And what we're also seeing is there's a younger generation coming into the industry. There's companies that are handing their businesses over to their family that is younger coming in. And it's interesting because those family members that are coming in are sometimes shocked at how backwards the industry has been. And they're so used to going on their phone and ordering something or being so tech savvy in the ways that how do you kind of bridge the two, right? You got to bridge it with great technology, but you also have to make sure that you understand the problems and the workflows, because the biggest thing that we sell too is we don't change the way that it's always been done. We obviously eliminate steps to make it more efficient, but we don't just come in and say, oh, you used to order this way. Now we're just going to do it all different. You're going to order this way. Like this doesn't work, especially with subcontractors in the construction technology space.
Now, I mean, my main message to everybody would be, if you're not tracking procurement in this way, you need to be looking at means to invest and to enhance your company. These are relatively low dollars considering the return on investment that you can get and the risk mitigation for it. Everybody should go look at subbase.io and think about supplementing that into your infrastructure for your business, no matter what size it is. one of the things that I want young people to understand is the opportunity to do exactly what you just did. Right now, I personally have found myself in a role where I'm focusing on tech. I mean, I still have my major clients, but we're working with tech and trying to create efficiencies and all these things with everything that we just talked about and more. And I never would have thought that that would be my focus, pursuing a career in, originally I was going to be an HVAC subcontractor, which I have my license for. And now I've been working for a GC for 10 years, but here I am. You know what I mean? I'm in development meetings with software people every day. And you, the same thing, right? You grew up, you had the family as a GC, you went into the concrete world for a little while. Bet you didn't have software platform on your radar for what your career path was. So when you went to make that jump, when you saw that need and you went to make that jump, what'd you do? Was it a bank loan? Did you pair up with a developer? What would you recommend to somebody who might be interested in software or engineering or tech, but is living in the construction world or doesn't realize that the construction world is a potential to chase that type of opportunity?
Yeah, I'll tell you the story. So once I had enough conviction that A, we can build software, and B, that we can build software that actually is solving a problem that people were interested in, I knew that there was an opportunity. So I actually was on the executive team of the old company I was at. And I went right to that. I was in an executive board meeting, and we were brainstorming initiatives on new projects. And I literally put together a pitch deck. I didn't even show them the software yet until I knew for sure that they would be blown away. And so I pitched them. I said, listen, guys, this is what I'm going to do. I've been doing it already here. I want you guys a part of the ride. And I gave them a pitch deck, and I showed them the software, literally showed it to them. And I showed it in real time. We were ordering to vendors. Vendors were responding, and they were pretty blown away. And so how we made the deal was I invested my own personal money in it. I had saved enough and invested enough that I had enough conviction myself. So I invested my own. And then I had that company who believed in it from ground zero invest as well. That was our first tranche to get us to the milestones that we're at today. We
so
did
no
take
bank
on
loan.
no loan. No, it was all in equity.
It was okay. So yeah, you basically had the executives from the company that you were at. You leveraged their cash.
They saw how I was able to operate in real time. I was managing, almost $100 million of work, and so I had the most thoughtful business plan. I really understood the risks. We all obviously come from the industry, so we knew how we needed to get there fast, and that allowed me to leapfrog, which is to where we are now, which is moving very fast, but also able to bring on a venture capital partner that's allowing us to go to the next level right now.
And what is the next level? What tools are you working on? So you're managing it currently. You're managing the process from submittal to order to tracking it to coming in the field and integrating with invoicing. What's the next step? Is it AI? Is it expanding into other functions? What is it?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence is big on the platform today, but that's going to be constant. If you're not keeping up with that, any software platform today that's not keeping up with it is not going to exist in the next couple of years. So that's a given. Where we're headed to right now, and it's really been driven by our users. Our users are just so close with us, really helping us guide on where we need to be, is equipment rental. It's very similar to material procurement, right? I have requests, I have quotes that go out, except the duration of how long things stay is a little different. Very big pain point in the industry, and something that no one is very difficult to track and manage. So that's one thing that we're doing that's coming up. And the other thing that we really love is the vendors. So we have lots of vendors on our platform today, and we have tools built for them, but we're going deeper with them. What I mean by that is the same person that's sending the order has to send it to a vendor. That vendor then has to move the data to someone inside that then has to get into a system for that order to go out of a warehouse. So we're going really deep with our vendors to get into the workflow, make their lives 10x better, and be able to provide better service for those subs, because being bombarded with emails, texts, and phone calls all day is a disaster. And at the rate that some of these companies are ordering, it's almost not manageable to keep up with. So
I think as an industry, we're all way too accessible, right? Like people send you one email and they assume that you're going to see it, and it's like, well, dude, I get 1,000 a day. There's no way that I'm going to see. Like, that's why I tell people, you got to call me and text me if you really need my attention, right?
Yeah, and look, the thing about the vendors too is you have to understand that relationship. This is not an Amazon experience where you just buy and click and buy. Like, there's trusted individuals on both sides. The relationships they have with the vendors have been there for years, tens of years. It's not going away. And so we want to make sure that both those parties have a phenomenal experience and that they can both, derive what they need from the platform. So that's really what we're focused on, is how do you make that experience on that side 10x?
So there's a couple things there too. You know, a lot of young people, they assume that you got to buy all of your stuff to start your company. A lot of companies, major companies, just rent it as they need it. And that's just another relationship to manage, and rental agreements, and making sure that, you know, you don't have something sitting there and you're paying for it and not using it and all those things. Right. And when you speak about that relationship with your vendors, the general contractor, I have a tremendous amount of trust in my subcontractors. Like you just said, you know, they're the expert and I have to rely on them, especially if there's no spec. Well, who are they relying on? Because a lot of the time they're relying on the vendors, right? These aren't just Amazon orders. They're not salespeople. You know, if you're ordering a air handler from Train, the person that the HVAC contractor talks to is usually an engineer of some kind at Train that's helping them with equipment selection, or like, what's a cheaper version of this, or a more efficient option, or does the spec even work? Is it a square peg for a square hole?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So these are very, very important relationships to manage. And if you were really paying attention, you know, I just named like 5 different jobs that are in the construction industry that are pretty lucrative that people don't think of. So
yeah, listen, it's a very lucrative world. The sub to material world is very lucrative. It's very deep. It's very tight, relationship heavy, but it could be done a lot better. And I think they both see that. So that's where we exist right now.
Now, Eric, I know we're coming up on time and you're a busy guy, so I always like to throw it up there for any kind of advice. Is there anything that you want to say, whether it be about your company or advice to young people about the industry? The floor is open, my friend.
Yeah, I would say first about the industry and young people. Like, I knew from a very early age that I wanted to get into construction. I studied it at the University of Florida, not to plug it, but I do think that if you're passionate about building, was the best career decision I ever made, because you can be a lawyer, you can be a contractor, you can be an accountant, you can see so many facets of a business, you can go into technology. And the fact that most people don't understand how complex the industry is and how wild and crazy it is pretty interesting. But I would say for any young person that's really interested in the industry, I would always suggest starting in the trades first, because I think that gives you a great background and really a great solid foundation. And then you can always go get a job at a GC or even a developer. It just makes you that much more valuable, in my opinion. I would also say that the pre-construction side is one of the most important. Typically, obviously, estimators are first hired, last fired, because they're the ones that are really dialing in on the work. And that'll really help you understand how to read plans and how to actually build from a 2D version, and then go see it in the field is really the next step. That would be my advice for the industry, people. Anyone that's obviously interested in SubBase, look, we love talking about it. It's all we do. We've been super passionate from day one about it. The platform's growing, and we are super excited to engage with those that see the need for materials being digitized in a workflow that's going to help the entire industry. So we're very active on LinkedIn, and we're just very active in general around the community. So definitely encourage anyone to reach out if they have questions, or we'll just love to see what we're doing.
Listen, subbase.io, I'm telling you right now, you can't build a project if you can't set up your dominoes and have them fall if you don't have any dominoes to set up, right? And that's why, above cash flow, above everything that's needed to run a project, I always say that procurement's the most important thing, to make those dominoes run and fall down efficiently right to the finish line. So, you know, Eric, I really appreciate it. There was also a pun in there that you said.
Which one?
With standing on a foundation, because you decided to go into concrete to develop that foundation, the SubBase.
That's a good one.
Can't let that go. Can't let that go. Right.
Yeah.
So in all seriousness, though, this is the biggest pain point in the industry. It is the first thing that I always train people on, no matter what level they are at. And like I said, I'm still training people into their 60s. And if you can perfect this, you know, when I think about subs that I want to hire, I think about how difficult the procurement process is. I think about how reliable they are, because so many people are unreliable. I need somebody that I can turn a blind eye to and not really worry about it, right? Because they can't meet my schedule if they can't get the stuff. So this is such a low-hanging fruit that nobody grabs, that it has a tangible return on investment that I highly recommend that anybody looks into in their industry for their company. And that if you are new to the industry, or you know, even if you've been in the industry, you really should be aware of this tool, what it can bring to your team. Maybe you got to advocate to bring it into your company. And that's a great value add, because it shows your company that you're in it to win it and you're trying to make the team better. So I highly recommend it. Go check out subbase.io, sub S-U-B base, BASE.io. Eric, can they find you on social media or anything?
Yeah, LinkedIn is really the best. Eric Helitzer, SubBase as well on there. We're on Instagram too, and we like to really post a lot more content from the field, from some of our users. So we're very active. So you'll be able to find us if you search for us.
Okay, cool. I will, I'm going to cut some clips. I'm going to make sure I include them in the post. Eric, I very much appreciate you taking the time to come on here. Super profound stuff. And everyone be good. I'll catch you next time.
Thanks.